Okay, so picture this. A man falls from a plane, lands in a garden.
Why?
Sounds unbelievable, right? And yeah, it's definitely a tragic story. But this particular case, it happened in June 2019, Clapham, London. It's got so many layers to it. It's like an international mystery.
That's wild.
It is. And today we're going to dive deep into this story, and our main source is an incredible investigative article from The Guardian. It's by Sarin Kale, and the title is Out of Thin Air, The Mystery of the Man Who Fell from the Sky.
Oh, I remember that article, yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, this story, it really, like, captures your imagination, right?
Decades.
Because it makes you wonder, like, how far would someone go for a better life? You know, risking their own life in the process. It's disturbing for sure, but it's also, like you said, it's fascinating, all the stuff around it.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to try to figure out today. Who was this man? How did he end up on that Kenya Airways flight? And like the biggest question of all, how could anyone survive a fall from 3,500 feet? It seems impossible.
It does, you're right. It seems totally impossible. But actually, there are a few cases, and we'll talk about this, of stowaways in wheel wells who have actually lived.
That's crazy.
It's incredible.
So before we get into all that, let's set the scene. Right.
Cool.
Sunny Sunday afternoon in London. People are out enjoying the weather. And then suddenly a body drops from the undercarriage of a plane right into this guy, John Baldock's garden. Can you even imagine?
Oh my gosh, I mean, the shock. I can't even fathom it.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It's like Detective Sergeant Paul Graves. He was the lead on the investigation. He called it like a meeting of worlds, you know, like this quiet suburban life just colliding with this like horrific hidden reality.
It's such a stark contrast.
Yeah.
So the police, obviously, they immediately jump into action. They're examining the plane, and they find this rucksack tucked into the landing gear compartment. And inside, just some basic supplies. Bread, a bottle of Fanta,
Right.
water, a pair of trainers.
Wow, so like packing for that kind of trip, I don't know what to say. It's both tragic and like, I don't know, strangely kind of poignant. You know,
Yeah.
It's like this glimpse into the last things he chose to bring with him.
I know, right? It's like, what do you pack for a journey like that?
Yeah, I know.
So investigators, they trace the flight back to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi. They run fingerprints, DNA, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And nothing.
Mhm.
Zero matches in any database. It's like this guy just appeared out of thin air.
Yeah. And that's actually pretty common in like these migrant cases. A lot of times they travel without documents, so it makes it almost impossible to identify them, even after they're gone.
It's so sad. And then there's the big question, right? How could anyone survive in a wheel well? I mean, we're talking sub-zero temperatures, lack of oxygen, that's hypoxia, and then the bends. You know, decompression sickness from the change in air pressure.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The conditions are brutal. But there's this theory. It's called the hibernation theory. Yeah. Some scientists believe that when you're exposed to extreme cold, it can actually trigger this, like, diving reflex.
A diving reflex.
It slows down your heart rate, and it redirects blood flow to your vital organs, you know? And then on top of that, when you have hypothermia, your metabolic rate goes way down. So the idea is that maybe some stowaways actually enter this state of, like, suspended animation.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I know.
Doesn't it?
Like suspended animation.
But there's actually some evidence for this. Researchers point to things like, you know, cases where, like, those Danish teenagers who survived after nearly drowning in, like, a freezing fjord.
Really?
Yeah, they were clinically dead for hours, but then they fully recovered after being warmed up.
They were dead for hours.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
It is.
Okay, but hold on. What about the noise and the vibration during the flight? Like in the wheel well, would that even allow for hibernation? That's a good question. And to be honest, we don't really know for sure. Like, there's still so much we don't know about how the human body can survive in those kinds of situations.
Right.
But what we do know is that a lot of surviving stowaways are found covered in frost. So it means they definitely experience severe hypothermia during the flight.
Okay, so maybe, just maybe, this hibernation theory, as wild as it sounds, could be a possibility.
It's definitely the most, like, plausible explanation we have right now.
Yeah.
It's the one that makes the most sense.
Yeah. All right, so back to our investigation in London. Detective Graves, he actually travels all the way to Kenya, determined to find any clue about this stowaway's identity. He searches slums near the airport. He goes through morgue records. He even reviews the airport security footage. But it's a dead end, every single lead.
Yeah. These kinds of investigations, I mean, they face so many obstacles, language barriers, cultural differences, a lot of times just a general lack of cooperation. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle, but you only have half the pieces, you know?
Yeah, it's going to be so frustrating.
It is.
And on top of all that, the security footage at the airport, it doesn't show how the man got on the plane. It's like he vanished into thin air, literally.
Wow. That is crazy.
So that missing piece of the puzzle, it leads to a lot of speculation. Was there security breach? Were airport staff involved? Or did he somehow sneak onto the grounds without anyone seeing him? I mean, it really highlights how even the most secure places can be vulnerable.
Yeah, you would think airports would be, like, impenetrable.
Right.
But it's not just about fences and cameras, you know. It's layers upon layers of security measures, like biometric scanners, behavioral analysis, you know, all these sophisticated ways to screen cargo. But this case, it just shows that even with all that, even the most advanced systems, they still have weaknesses.
Absolutely. And this is where the media comes in and things get even more complicated. There was this report from Sky News. They claimed they had identified the man, but the whole thing fell apart really quickly. Turns out the person they named was alive and well in prison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a big mistake.
It was a mess.
Yeah. I mean, this whole media frenzy surrounding this case is a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong with instant news. And it shows how important it is to have responsible reporting, especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics like migration. Like, in today's world, misinformation can spread so fast, like wildfire.
It makes you wonder, was this a rush to be the first to break the story, or were there other motives at play, you know?
Yeah, yeah. That line between real journalism and just wanting to create a sensation, it can get really blurry, especially when there's all this pressure to get views and clicks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Right.
About what matters more, you know, is it just security no matter what, or can we find some kind of balance between that and, you know, compassion and understanding?
Yeah, and in this case, like, finding that balance is extra tricky because if they expose security flaws at the airport, it could have huge consequences. Like, it could even affect their international flight status.
You're right. It's a really tough call. But while investigators were trying to figure all that out, the story takes a really interesting turn. Remember how we were talking about those rare cases where stowaways actually survived those crazy journeys?
Yeah.
Well, just over a year later, there's another incident, and it really throws a wrench into everything we thought we knew.
Oh, yeah. This is the one with the teenager, right?
That's the one.
I remember reading about that. That was insane.
It's wild. So February 2021, a 16-year-old Kenyan boy was found alive in the wheel well of a Turkish Airlines cargo plane, landed in Maastricht, Netherlands. And guess what?
What?
The flight took off from the same airport in Nairobi.
Wait a minute. So after all the investigations and the security upgrades and everyone saying there was no breach, another stowaway manages to get on a plane at the same airport.
Exactly. And this time he survived. He told Dutch investigators that he just walked onto the plane and fell asleep.
He just walked on.
That's what he said.
Mm.
It just goes to show you how desperate some people are.
Yeah.
They'll risk everything for even a tiny chance at a better life.
It's incredible and heartbreaking at the same time. Like, it's amazing he survived, but it's so sad that he felt like this was his only option.
Absolutely. And the fact that it happened again at the same airport really raises questions about those security measures. Like, no matter how high-tech they are, it seems like they're not foolproof.
So what's the deal? Is it a lack of resources or corruption, or is it just impossible to make an airport 100% secure?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it brings us to a really important point. This case, as crazy as it is, it's just a tiny glimpse into a much bigger problem, the whole issue of global migration.
I was just thinking that. We've been so focused on this one man and the mystery of how he died, but his story is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle, you know? A story of human movement and hardship and people searching for something better.
Exactly. Every single day, people are taking huge risks, traveling on dangerous routes all over the world. They're fleeing poverty, conflict, persecution, all kinds of things, all because they're looking for a chance at a decent life.
And so many of their stories go untold. Their struggles are invisible to most of us. It's easy to just focus on the headlines and the statistics, but we can't forget that behind every number, there's a real person with hopes and dreams and a family.
That's so true. We can't lose sight of that human side of things. And sadly, as we saw with the man who fell from the sky, a lot of these stories don't have a happy ending.
His story is especially sad because he was never identified. He's buried in an unmarked grave in Lambeth Cemetery. Just a simple plaque that says, Unknown male, died 30th June 2019, age 30. No family, no friends, just a reminder of how many of these tragedies go unnoticed.
It's powerful, isn't it, that unmarked grave? It represents his story, but it also represents all the others who died trying to find a new life, all the people whose stories we'll never know.
It really makes you think. This deep dive has been quite a journey. We started with this shocking image of a man falling from a plane, and now we're talking about survival and airport security and the whole complicated issue of migration and the human cost of it all.
It's a lot to take in, isn't it? But it's important to remember that even though we've been focused on this one case, thousands of people die every year on migration routes around the world. They're all facing similar dangers, and they're all driven by that same desperate hope for a better life.
It's sobering. It would be easy to just turn away from all this, pretend it's not happening. But the more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we are to actually do something about them and to approach them with empathy and compassion.
It's easy to forget that, when we talk about these big issues, we're talking about real people, people with hopes and dreams and fears, just like us.
It's true. I think this deep dive has really driven that point home for me. We started with this crazy image of a man falling from a plane, and we ended up talking about so much more. Migration survival, the human cost of it all.
And it all goes back to that man's story, right? We may never know all the details, but his journey and all the other journeys like his, they force us to look at some hard truths about the world.
Truths about things like inequality and desperation, and how the systems that are supposed to protect people sometimes fail the ones who need it most.
Yeah, and it makes us think, how can we make the world a better place? A place where people don't feel like they have to risk their lives just to find opportunity or escape suffering.
Big questions, right? As we wrap up this deep dive, the one that really sticks with me is this. How do we balance security with basic human rights? How do we make sure everyone has a chance at a decent life without having to make these impossible choices?
Tough question. No easy answers. But maybe it starts with remembering that we're all human. We're all connected. We need to listen to each other's stories, challenge our own assumptions, and push for policies that are both safe and compassionate.
Because this isn't just about one man falling from a plane.
Exactly.
It's about all of us. It's about the world we're creating and what kind of future we want to see.
It's a good reminder that everything we do has an impact. Every choice we make. As individuals and as a society, we have a responsibility to create a world that works for everyone.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive. We hope you found it thought-provoking. And maybe even learned a thing or two.
Yeah, and maybe it even sparked some curiosity. Encourage you to go out and learn more about these issues.
Definitely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.